Alas, Ndelay's KNC alliance with the KPP couldn't save him, and he lost to Foncha's KNDP by a narrow margin of 13 to 14 seats in the House of Assembly. One reason for the KNC's loss was Paul Calais' decision to run as an independent candidate. Following the election, he was expelled from the KNC. He would later create the Cameroon United Party in 1960, advocating for outright independence for southern Cameroons. The majority of votes cast in the elections represented a desire for neither integration with Nigeria nor reunification with French Cameroon. KNC and KPP votes were essentially votes against reunification, whereas KNDP votes were votes against integration in Nigeria. The traditional rulers took some credit for the upset victory of the KNDP and took the position that the election results clearly opposed integration with Nigeria and therefore supported independence. The 1959 election represented the first of many UK-backed coups to drive southern Cameroons towards integration with Nigeria. As the UK's chosen candidate, Ndelay had used government vehicles for campaigns, an advantage Foncha did not have. As the powerful premier, Ndelay had used his influence to redraw electoral districts to give his party an unfair advantage and disproportionately gain more seats. So although Foncha won by a wide margin of almost 60% of the popular vote, he did beat Ndelay by only one seat in the assembly. On January 30th, 1959, John Foncha took over as premier and administered southern Cameroons, along with J.O. Field as commissioner and Malcolm Meline as deputy commissioner of southern Cameroons, all reporting to James Robertson, governor of Nigeria, resident in Lagos, Nigeria. In February, the US Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, noted that the KNDP victory represented a blow to the UK's plans of integrating southern Cameroons into Nigeria. It was also stated that although Foncha had not yet revealed his policies, he was expected to favour independence over a loose association with French Cameroon. No sooner had the election dust settled than Ndelay and Bilay of the KNC and KPP alliance dispatched a telegram to the UN, arguing that the election results were not conclusive on the fate of southern Cameroons on account of the KNDP's very narrow margin of victory. They challenged the KNDP to a debate in the Southern Cameroons House of Assembly prior to returning to the UN to clearly state its position. The pro-reunification UPC and OK camps, comprising Felix Moulier, Ernest Wande, Mai Matip, De Koumaza, André Marie Bida, and many others, took off for New York in early February 1959. They were going to advocate for immediate reunification and independence of all the Cameroons at the special Cameroons UN session. They were being financially and otherwise sponsored by a handful of African governments: Nasser of Egypt, Krumah of Ghana, Touré of Guinea, who among other things were against the creation of what was at the time termed microstates, or small countries, the size of southern Cameroons. At the UN, speaking for the OK Party, Koumaza ridiculed the idea of integration into Nigeria as an acceptable means of terminating trusteeship, stating that such a decision would be inconsistent with the Charter of the UN. He advocated immediate reunification and independence of all Cameroons. Failing that, he reluctantly admitted that a plebiscite would have to be conducted over both French Cameroon and British Cameroons to ascertain the will of the people about their future. Toumaza didn't consider a plebiscite a fair solution. He stated his mistrust of the UK government and the unspoken agenda of integrating both southern and northern Cameroons into Nigeria, and proposed conditions under which a plebiscite might be considered acceptable. Felix Moulier of the UPC concurred with Toumaza. In the case of French Cameroon, he demanded that free and fair elections be carried out before independence, the hope being that the UPC, then a leading grassroots political party, would win elections, oust Amadou Ahidjo, and install a government in French Cameroon chosen by the people and not by the French government. Next, the 1958 Cameroons Mission Report came up for consideration in the Trusteeship Council. It was very curious to note that although the mission concluded its visit in mid-November 1958, it didn't submit its final report to the Trusteeship Council until after the January 1959 elections. In fact, the report was submitted on February 6, 1959, right before the start of the Cameroons special UN session. Not surprisingly, and in line with Endelay's telegrams with the UK's wishes, the mission's conclusion was that the election's results in southern Cameroons could not be regarded as decisive, so far as the future of this part was concerned. With regards to northern Cameroons, Sir Andrew Cohen, the UK government's representative at the UN, declared British impartiality and willingness to agree to a plebiscite in northern Cameroons, if the need had been demonstrated. But since this was not the case, he did not think that the Trusteeship Council would wish gratuitously to burden the people of northern Cameroons with the paraphernalia of a mere formal consultation. In other words, a plebiscite would be a useless and unnecessary exercise, and the mission's recommendation of integrating northern Cameroons into Nigeria would be endorsed without question. Contradicting this view was the Soviet Union representative, Mr. Arkady Zobolev, who questioned whether the mission had considered the loudly expressed wish for separation of the people of northern Cameroons in 1953, before deciding that nobody in the northern Cameroons had demanded separation. Replying to this question, the chairman of the mission, Benjamin Gierig, declared that the mission had not observed any important opposition to the status quo in northern Cameroons. Further attempts to cross-examine Gierig were frustrated by Andrew Cohen over procedural and technical questions. By the time the debates ended, the council was clearly divided on the question of a plebiscite in northern Cameroons between supporters of Cohen, supporters of Zobolev, and the uncommitted. Before the council resumed on February 18, 1959, the UK had arranged for the Minister of Northern Cameroon's Affairs in the Northern Nigeria regional government based on Kaduna, Malum, Abdullahi, Damburam, Jada, to come and address the special UN session. When the session resumed, the British and Soviet Union stuck to their positions, and the uncommitted decided in favour of a plebiscite. Seeing that a plebiscite in northern Cameroons was no longer avoidable, British supporters embraced it with the plan to improve the situation in southern Cameroons in favour of integration. The representative of New Zealand put it as follows: in view of the unanimity of opinion in the north, the only result of a consultation would be to strengthen the proportion of those throughout the territory who wished to accede to Nigeria. Andrew Cohen tried to lobby the Trusteeship Council that although Jongu Foncha had won the 1959 elections, the election results were contradictory to a poll that the UN visiting mission had conducted as to the future of southern Cameroons. On this basis, he urged the Council to endorse the visiting mission's recommendation of a plebiscite in southern Cameroons. However, owing to the tug-of-war in the Council, on February 18, 1959, Resolution 1926, the 23rd was passed, essentially postponing a decision on everything concerning British Cameroons. The Soviet Union abstained from voting on the resolution on the grounds that it was inconsistent with the recommendations of the visiting mission. Defending the position of the UK on Northern Cameroons, Malam Durham endorsed the visiting mission's position for immediate integration of Northern Cameroons with Nigeria without a plebiscite. This was contrary to his position during the UN mission's visit in November 1958. On the question of a union with French Cameroon, he argued that the relatively short-lived German Cameroon protectorate from 1884 to 1914 did not create strong enough geographic, economic, racial or cultural affiliations to the people of French Cameroon to warrant reunification. He argued that the border had arbitrarily separated a large segment of the Northern Cameroon's population from their natural traditional rulers, the sultans and emirs in northern Nigeria. Malam Durham's argument strengthened the UK's argument for integrating Northern Cameroons with Nigeria. Although the UK had done very little to develop Northern Cameroons, it desperately wanted to integrate it with Nigeria to consolidate and strengthen its economic and political ties. On the political landscape, the UK needed to appease Northern Nigeria's elites, especially Sir Ahmadu Bello, the Sardana of Sokoto, and Tafawa Balewa, who had been instrumental in the creation of a Nigerian federation. In the third week of February, Endeley and Foncha arrived in New York. Addressing the Fourth Committee of the UN, Endeley endorsed the visiting mission's recommendation for a plebiscite on the question of reunification. He said it was an idea that was neither provided for in the trusteeship agreement nor supported by responsible opinion in French Cameroon. He said only irresponsible people still pursued a barren idea of reunification for which no programme had ever been worked out. Yet, paradoxically, he concluded that only two options, association with Nigeria or reunification with French Cameroon, should be on the ballot. Endeley's choice of reunification as the second option was based on the hope that people would fear and detest it so much so that they would instead choose to integrate with Nigeria. On his part, Foncha clearly stated that the KNDP had won the election on a specific platform: secession before Nigeria became independent, a short period of UK trusteeship, the possibility for reunification would be explored, independence, and eventual reunification if discussions with the government of Cameroon were successful. Foncha's choice of questions on the plebiscite were secession versus integration with Nigeria. According to him, reunification was predicated first by secession and depended on discussions with French Cameroon. For this reason, reunification should not and could not be a question on the plebiscite. At one point, the representative of India, C.S. Jai, asked Foncha whether if reunification post-secession failed, did he envisage a separate independent state of southern Cameroons, and if so, would it be economically viable? To both of which, Foncha replied a resounding yes. When it became apparent that Foncha was clearly leaving open the door to complete independence, as he had stated, he was pressured to define with absolute clarity the process negotiating reunification. Understandably, this was something he could not satisfactorily answer because he had barely taken over as Premier and had certainly never approached the French Cameroon government on the question of reunification. By the end of the deliberations, the Fourth Committee was confronted with the same four positions that had emerged in the territory as far back as 1957. 1. Integration with Nigeria, favoured by the KNC and KPP alliance. 2. Secession, leading to independence and membership in the Commonwealth, favoured by the Council of Chiefs and natural rulers. 3. Secession, leading to independence, then reunification with French Cameroon or outright independence, a position favoured by the KNDP. 4. And finally, immediate reunification, pure and simple, advocated by the UPC and the OK parties. At the conclusion of the 13th session, the UN passed two sweeping resolutions affecting the Cameroons. Resolution 1349 of March 13th, 1959 stated that French Cameroon would attain independence on January 1st, 1960. By gaining independence, the Trusteeship Agreement would cease to be in force in accordance with Article 76b of the Charter of the United Nations. Resolution 1350 of March 13th, 1959 on British Cameroons recommended that Northern Cameroons hold a plebiscite in November 1959 to decide between the following two options. Do you wish the Northern Cameroons to be part of the northern region of Nigeria when the Federation of Nigeria becomes independent? Or are you in favour of deciding the future of Northern Cameroons at a later date? For Southern Cameroons, the UN recommended that a plebiscite be conducted between December 1959 and April 1960, decided that the two alternatives to be put before the people should be considered at the 14th session of the GA. The significance and power of these resolutions make March the 13th, 1959 one of the most important dates in the history of the Cameroons. Whereas French Cameroons, rightly or wrongly, depending on whether you were supporting the incumbent Ahidjo government or the UPC, got a promise for its independence on January 1st, 1960. It is important to note the calamity that the UN bestowed upon Southern Cameroons. Rather than honouring the divergent positions argued before the Fourth Committee as the freely expressed wishes of the people of Southern Cameroons, the UN unilaterally and in the interest of the UK alone narrowed down the options to two alternatives and to appear to be impartial and escape the scorn of history. The UN carefully avoided stating what the text of the two alternatives of Resolution 1350, Section the 13th, ought to be. What then was the purpose in narrowing down the choices to two alternatives, when clearly there were more than two choices, and there was no consensus on only two questions, if not to stifle and ultimately try to kill the freely expressed wishes of the people?